Hi, my name is Mary Dotson, and today I'm going to share with you my discrete trial training intervention on letter and sound identification. And I'm currently using this intervention with two of my kindergarten students. And the significance of this skill is fairly obvious, but it is definitely a pre-reading skill, pre-literacy skill, and it gets the students set up to be readers. So it's certainly a skill that needs to be solid as they do move forward into reading texts. And it also is the progress monitor that I use to monitor their IEP goals in literacy, as well as the progress monitor we use for our state testing. So doing this intervention helps to kind of solidify those skills, and it gives me accurate data as to how the students are progressing with the skill. So the materials that I use for this intervention are letter sound cards, or letter cards that I've created, and I would present the material to the student by showing them two cards. And starting out, we want to make sure that we don't choose letters that look similar as far as their formation. So, for example, I would not want to present an L and a T together to the student because they do look similar in their formation and they can be easily confused. So one example I might do would be a lowercase s and a T, and I would prompt the student by saying point to the letter S, and if the student points to the correct letter, then I would reinforce him or her by saying, yes, good job pointing to the letter S. And then if they were incorrect, I would point to the correct letter and say, this is the letter S. And then say, point to the letter S, and then they would point to it. And if they needed further prompting, because they still weren't pointing to it, then I would physically take their hand and point to the letter S and have them repeat it to kind of solidify that. And then the same thing would be for uppercase letters, for letter ID, and then if I was doing letter sounds, which would be a separate intervention, I would say point to the letter that makes the A sound, and then the student would select the letter, and the reinforcement for that would be the same, saying yes, that letter makes the A sound, and then keep them going with that so they were clear if they were correct or incorrect. And then as time goes on, I would add a third letter to the mix that they would have to choose between for identification, and would move up to 4 letters typically. They would have 4 choices to choose from. And so the real challenge with this, as it is with a lot of skills I think in special ed, is how do we get the students to generalize the skill in other contexts, because oftentimes I will work on a skill with the student in small group or in a one-on-one setting, and then they go back to their classroom and are evaluated, and they aren't able to produce the same results. So I think one of the keys for that is to make sure they are practicing the skill in in different settings to make sure they can transfer that skill. So for example, if they're shown the material at the table in the special ed room, can we take that same material and take them out into the hall and show them those same letters, and can they remember it then? Or take them to the general education room, show them the letters, and can they produce those same results? So initially, after the initial trials in one setting, I like to take them into a different setting and take data on that to see if are they transferring those skills to another setting. The other thing is advancing kind of the training with the skill. So initially we would use that prompt of point to the letter S, but later on we may change up the language depending on what the classroom teacher is using in the classroom, so they can generalize that. So can you find the letter S, or touch the letter S? So the wording is a little differentiated, but they're still meeting that same expectation. And that kind of goes to that piece about the working memory. So I think a lot of that is, can the student hold a skill or an idea in their working memory? And so that kind of trains them to do that when we present the material in different contexts. So some cautions that I've noticed, or some more challenges with discrete trial training is with the eye tracking, so making sure that the student is looking at the material you're presenting. So it may be to make sure that they're at the right height to see it appropriately at the table. So sometimes I have to get the wiggle seat so the child is up to the table at the correct level. Make sure you may have to put the material on like a clipboard or a slant board so they are seeing it at their appropriate level, and so that issue is not interfering with their performance of the task. Another thing is, because you may only have 2 choices between letters, the student has a 50% chance of getting the letter correct, so that accurate data collection and multiple trials over time is going to show if were they just guessing, getting it right, or getting lucky all that time, or can they consistently produce those same results and recognize the letter and recognize the sound. So that's going to definitely be important. And speaking of data collection, this is an example of a data collection sheet that I use. It's probably hard to see. I can probably post this with my information, but it has the date, the instructor, the target skill, and then it lists a number of trials. So I would list the letter that I'm working on in the first box, so if that's the letter A, and then I would circle if the student answered correctly, incorrectly, no response, or if it was a prompted response. And so I can track data on that to see if they're able to do it independently. Are they able to do it with prompts, or are they not responding consistently and have to receive those prompts, or have to receive a physical prompt, and there's a space for me to note in my comments how they're responding to that task. So it allows me to keep data, share it with the classroom teacher, paraprofessionals, their parents, and keep an accurate record of that to know how I need to modify my instruction going forward. And then the question about how how appropriate is discrete trial training for older children, and I think it really depends on what the intervention or the skill is. We always want to make sure that whatever our intervention is appropriate for the student, and ideally what does the student need to be successful and make growth in a certain area. So I could see it transferring to older students with maybe like multiplication facts or addition facts, things that they need to have solid and need to be able to access quickly. I know with the current curriculum they're trying to get away from that and have them use strategies, but I do think some of those pieces with the math facts, they need to be able to retrieve those answers quickly, so doubles facts, or 7 times 2, they need to be able to know that's 14 right away to be able to solve those more challenging problems. So I could see that kind of flashcard work and piece with that being appropriate for older kids, but I think it certainly depends on the student themselves and what kind of supports they need to be successful. And another piece with that is sometimes I think a multisensory approach is another component that can be effective. So as far as the letter names and sounds, sometimes I'll have students trace this on a surface that has a texture, and so then they can trace the letter and actually feel the letter, feel how it's formed, and kind of have that tactile experience to connect with them so they can remember the letter names and sounds. So that's also another option to add to instruction and kind of give it a new component. So that is my material for discrete trial training. Thank you for listening, and have a great night.